All right, listen up, folks. When the gurus slide, we got a celeb in the house. He's your expert guide with designations aplenty and awards to boot. He's a financial planner, writer, and commentator. So tune in and learn as we delve into his mind. Leadership to Wealth Nation. Jason Prairie is here to help you shine. In the house, Jason Pereira. Jason, how are you doing
Thank you.
today?
Quite the intro. Okay, I hope to live up to it. We'll see how this goes.
Well, a little shout out to the All In podcast. I enjoyed that show. Don't know if you ever listen to them, but they share a lot of great stuff on the economy and markets and stuff like that. So, and it was something fun. And I was like, hey, Jason's coming back on the show. We got to give him a little special love. So
the praise. That's fair enough. All good.
So, Jason, 2022 is in the books. What, from a financial standpoint, what would you describe that? How would you put that into some words to sum up 2022 and close that one out?
How do you put into words any year in the, still kind of dealing with COVID post world? I mean, like, how much more we got going on? Getting off of a global pandemic, having a invasion of Ukraine. The only thing certain in life is uncertainty, and I think this was yet another year that proved it. So I mean, it depends on what angle you want to talk about. Collapsing Canadian housing market, the semi bubble bursting in the U.S. In stock markets around the world. There's lots to discuss about what happened.
Love it. Well, I absolutely want to talk about those. I was talking with Wyatt, my producer, and one of the things there's a number of issues that I think, they're going to sound very political, but I'm really interested in getting your take from the financial standpoint, right? The financial impacts of them, and so as we get into where we're going, let's talk about just in general, what are you kind of seeing for 2023 for financial markets in North America, and what are you sort of advising your clients that way?
Yeah, so my advice never changes, quite honestly. And that's that basically there is no predicting this. If anyone could effectively truly predict markets, they would make Warren Buffett look broke. Okay. That's the reality of it. So, what I will say in general is that after last year's correction, things look less crazy high priced, right? And in fairness, that was largely linked to the fact that interest rates were nearly zero, right? So that caused a lot of asset inflation, whether that be housing or whether that be commodities or whether that be stocks, right? Everything was just going up, because when your discount rate is zero, your property value goes to infinity, right? So that's corrected, and that's taken a lot of heat out the market. What I will say is, when I look at the long-term numbers that matter, things like the capital adjusted PE or the Schiller CAPE numbers, markets are still not cheap, but they're not crazy expensive that they were, but they're still not cheap. So we're still looking at, you look at any of the capital markets assumptions from people who actually do look at the quantitative aspects of this and say, this is what we're looking at going forward. They're still relatively muted from a historical standpoint. We're not looking at expectations of double-digit stock returns in the next 10, 20 years. We're looking at single-digit, right? So I think first, but that said, when you look at polls out of the U.S. or elsewhere, or actually global polls on what investors are expecting in return, the expectation number seems to keep on creeping up. It's like at around 15%. Meanwhile, I'm looking at capital market assumptions of like 7 to 8. The first thing that I will say is that everybody needs to get realistic assumptions as to what the heck is going to happen. That's first and foremost. Now, what is my advice around this? My advice is the same at all times. Okay. End of the day, what you should be doing is you should be entering into a solid financial plan where you actually are not just doing this aimlessly. You have a plan. And what that means is you've identified what it is you're trying to accomplish in life. You've basically got a plan for a portfolio that's basically designed around your risk tolerances, which is a big issue now, because it's actually now been mandated by regulation, even though few people are doing it properly. A portfolio that's designed around your risk profile, and basically a plan for what you're going to put into that thing on a regular basis in order to achieve those goals that you're looking to achieve. Because the markets are going to do what they're going to do. You cannot control that. Trying to time it is the easiest way to screw up and basically cost yourself a ton of money. Just have a plan, be in a portfolio that basically ties you to your proper risk profile, and stay the course, right? And getting caught up in whatever the heck it is you think people are making easy money in is the fastest way to get blown out, right? Anyone who bought an assignment, who bought a pre-construction deal that was closing in the next 12 months, oh my God, are they finding out that everybody making money in real estate is not really a thing. It was an abnormality.
Well, that's absolutely true, and I think for people, they absolutely need to realize they need to have a plan. And one of the things that I found on the real estate side is there's absolutely cycles. There's absolutely ups and downs that you can watch. And for instance, the whole interest rates. People were asking me about that, and I said they're going to keep them low. They're going to keep them low, but just realize they're going to come up. And when the Bank of Canada started announcing they were going to raise rates, I put it out there, and I think people beginning of last year, I put it out there. Okay, they've said that they are going to start raising rates. Stop looking differently, because they've said they're going to do it aggressively. And what I love about the Bank of Canada that way is that they tell you what they're going to do, but then they kind of pretend like, oh, it might not be that bad, but they've covered their butt, right? And then they go ahead and
look. Here's the thing,
and they went and started raising them.
Look, I will say this much. People get bent out of shape over central banks, and the reality is that their job is to fight inflation. So, one thing I will say that shouldn't have been done is when Tiff Macklin basically said they're going to be low for a long time.
Yes.
I'm sorry. The reality is the only answer is our projections are they're going to be low for a long time. But if we have reason to increase them, we will not hesitate, because that is their job, right? And as much as people who basically let's talk about the entire interest rate issue. Okay, here's what it comes down to.
Come on, let's get into it.
All right. It's very simple. There's an old, anyone's ever taken Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and has worked with anyone who basically is like, an upper level master at this, knows this story. And it's basically, when you ask the instructor, how do I get out of this position? If they don't know an answer, the response is always the same. Don't let yourself get in that position. And that is one of the most important things that basically you can educate people on when it comes to financial planning. Is half of the game is not putting yourself in a bad position in the first place, right? And the reality is that if you were one of these people who basically bought and took the variable and could not, never mind the people who committed fraud to get it, because we know that is not an unsubstantial issue, or basically took out private mortgages on the side and then eventually not declare them, all kinds of shenanigans got up to. Never mind those. If you were someone who basically got the variable because they couldn't afford the fixed, you were already snookered, because frankly, you took on that risk. You took on the risk that if anything happened, you were going to suffer for it. So I always tell people, if you can't basically afford the fixed, you can't afford the variable, right? And if you can't afford, and I would say back when the interest rates were super low, my response was, if you can't afford the fixed at 3 to 4 points higher than where it is now, you can't afford the variable. That's the reality. But here's the thing. Everybody wants in. The bank told me I could do this, right?
Yes.
The reality is the bank is not your friend, right? Like I have an analogy where I basically analogize banks to drug dealers, quite honestly, because at the end of the day, they make money off your dependency, and that dependency is debt. So if you ask the drug dealer, how much of your drug can I consume? The answer is the same as the bank, as much as humanly possible without dying, right? They don't want you going bankrupt, but they want you here at all times. So, and when I say that, it's not that these people are specifically out there thinking it this way. It's that the system and the approvals and all of that are designed to give you as much access to leverage as possible, because everybody wants the dream of home ownership. So what the bank says you can afford is not what you can afford, because guess what? None of their metrics actually look at your actual lifestyle, just your income and other debt costs. That's it.
Yep. Yeah. It's amazing, because when you're obviously as a licensed agent, I'm looking at people, and I can see the ratios, see what their lifestyle is, see what's going on, and it's amazing to me that people are putting themselves into these situations and they think it's completely normal because everyone's doing it. Everyone's
Yeah.
jumping into $1 million homes, jumping into these mortgages, and
Well,
you're
the old, would you jump off a bridge if everybody else is doing it, right? But there is a serious, that, we all hear that as a kid. We all think I wouldn't
yeah,
do that, but there's a serious FOMO aspect of this, and there's a
yeah,
serious. I feel bad for these people who are just like
yes,
looking at runaway markets and saying I'm never going to be able to buy a house. Well,
yes,
I always say your final mistake is assuming that tomorrow is the same as today, right? Because
yes,
you know when we are quite literally the worst market in the world by almost every metric to buy real estate in terms of what the income to carrying cost ratios are, in terms of being a landlord, and the brutally anemic, if not negative, cash flow yields that we're seeing off these things. Right? If your only bet is I need to get in because before this price continues to get away from us, there is a natural breaking point to that around affordability. We cannot consume 100% of our after-tax income cannot go to paying a mortgage. We will die. That is quite simple. And
yeah.
there is a breaking point.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a private lender, I see some of these things and I'm thinking it is amazing to me that no one looks at some of these other metrics and that they just look at the box. And I shouldn't call them drug dealers, but
Call them
they look for
drivers.
the
It's
box
fine.
for what you know what can we give them so that they fit what we want. We don't I share this with people. They don't want your house. They,
No.
the last thing they want is your house. They want money to come in every month, regular on a regular basis. And I for investors, I always say banks never use their own money.
No.
They're always using someone
Well,
else's
never
money.
mind that.
So
I mean, let's look at what happened when things started getting bad, right?
yes,
So basically, you had a situation where variable rates, those two types of variable rate mortgages. One, the payment stays the same and less goes to
yes,
principal every month, and then the other one is basically your payment goes up. The first one, which sounds attractive to people, is okay. Well, it'll fluctuate, but it won't increase. Yeah, but the problem is that you get to a point where two of the biggest banks in the country, who were the biggest providers of that type of mortgage, get to the point where the interest was more than 100% of the principal.
yes.
It was more than 100% of the payment. So what
No,
did
the
they do?
payment. Yeah,
They didn't, some of them had trigger rates depending on the insurance, the plan, but others allowed you to capitalize that interest against the mortgage. Right. So now you were not only paying a mortgage payment, but you were actually owing more every month. Right. And this gets worse, if it was their money and it was an uninsured mortgage, it was a 75%, it was like 75 to 80% of the market value that they would give you as a loan. If it was an insured mortgage, it was 105 or 110%. They were saying, you know what, the taxpayer can stick the bill on this if necessary. So let's not even get into the ridiculous issue that is. The other piece of this is that when you get to the renewal, guess what has to happen? Well, you have to snap back to the original amortization on the renewal, right? So if your 25-year mortgage is now a 30-year mortgage because your interest rate got compounded onto the back of it, I'm using extreme numbers, and you're now 5 years in, that number is now basically got to snap back to a 20-year mortgage. Otherwise, you have to go out and refinance somewhere else, and either way, your payments are going to be dramatically higher.
yeah,
So
that's
it
right.
was a kick in the can down the road, and we're going to start to see some of these mortgages come due this year, and it's not going to be pretty.
Absolutely, absolutely, and especially when you consider that the average person max themselves out on
Yeah.
the mortgage payment, right? And
Well,
forget
everyone's
everything else.
everyone's priced for perfection. That's the problem, right? You were priced that nothing could go wrong, right? A lot of these decisions were made with like, okay, great, as long as I could hold my job and make these payments, I'm fine. Well, you know what? Now we're staring down the barrel of a recession. We're seeing layoffs in even the tech sector,
Yes,
that are 5 to 10% of their labor. Five
right.
to 10%. Even my clients, I've had several layoffs already of people with very highly skilled, very highly paid people. Right
Yeah,
now, the reality is that what happens in that scenario? The bank ain't gonna save you.
yeah, yeah. 4,000 at Twitter, 12,000 with I think Amazon or Google, and
No.
on and on and on. Yeah, techs. Well, I actually think the tech sector has been brilliant in terms of giving themselves more runway uh, by cutting this back, and I've looked at it as a good indicator for households to some degree.
Yeah.
If these big guys are saying, "How do we extend our runway?" There we go.
But I would say the other thing is they're the ones making the headlines. The small manufacturing shop down the street is not making the headlines for basically laying off 2 people and a 20 and a 40-person staff, right? So there's more going on here, right?
Yeah.
There's definitely more going on. And let's not even talk about the fact that, those mortgage payments went up at the same time that inflation was basically going through the roof. So now you're staring at grocery bills that are 10% higher, right? Like there was no breathing room, right? Again,
Yeah.
don't let yourself get in that position in the first place. And unfortunately, there is, luckily, if you listen to people, work with and listen to people like me, we do everything we can to keep you out of those positions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that I have very few people, if not any, very few cases where that happened. No cases where they are in a bad position are ones who didn't listen to us, quite honestly. I've had people who were so desperate to get into the real estate game because they thought all this money was being made that they would come to me with the deals that they wanted to look at. I would legitimately just sit back and like do the math and say, like, negative cash flow, don't do it, or this pre-construction costs more than the one that's done down the street, don't do it, right? Like, all this stuff. And on more than one occasion, after 4 or 5 times, we went over the numbers and I said no, they just called to inform me that they did it, right? They just called to inform me that they did it. And it's like, what was the point of this, right? And then they give me the numbers and it's as bad as any of the other ones, right? And it's because at the end of the day, at a certain point, they're like, you know what, enough's enough. I'm just going to do it, right? Like they just, because the desire, the FOMO, the greed, whatever you want to call it, is so great that they couldn't get out of it. And unfortunately, we have a couple clients where I have one right now that we were dealing with who did this, and they have an assignment. They had something that they were going to sell an assignment. The assignment market's completely disappeared, right? Because no one's speculating on these things going up. This thing closes in 2 months, and this person's going to have to basically close and sell because they can't carry it because there'll be negative cash flow. And the reality is, what are they looking at? If they're lucky, they'll break even. If they're lucky. If they're not lucky, it will be a big hit.
I'll tell you for a fact, there are, I don't know, we'll call them real estate gurus that are liquidating their portfolios right now because they are overexposed in the market. They held on to variable rates.
Yeah. I see them melting down on Twitter. I know. I will not name names, but I can tell you. The more they seem to care about the more they seem to care about monetary policy, the more I'm guessing that they're selling off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for instance, here in Ontario, I know of one guy that he's actually in court, so I'm not even going to get into that. But he literally held on to, like, huge portfolio, held on to variable rates, and all of the assumptions that were made along with acquiring those properties. It is amazing to me. Like, one of the rules that I tell people I have when I'm looking at an income property is I don't look at what's the fair market value in rents. We're going to be able to get it up to that. That's wonderful. What is it now, and can we survive on that? And everyone loves to talk about what you can get it to, but I'm like, can you actually make money with it right now based on what it is, especially in a province like Ontario where it is so difficult to
be cash flow positive? No kidding.
Yeah.
I mean, Ben Rabideau has got an index where he basically looks at, if you bought now at maximum leverage, where would you be? And that thing went south of basically went not only cash flow negative, it went principal negative, right? Like, meaning that your mortgage payment, the rent you were bringing in was not only enough that you wouldn't be able to cover your full mortgage payment, but you were actually not even it wasn't even covering the full interest portion of that. You were actually having to pay out of pocket for interest in addition to the principal payments.
Jason, over the last couple of years, I have watched people buying properties knowing that they are going to lose. They're, completely with this mindset of, they're going to go up in value. No worries. It's okay. if I take a loss on them, on a monthly basis, and I'm thinking, you have no, like, I got outbid on certain properties by double, like double.
Yeah.
And I remember telling the realtor, I said, go ahead and sell it to that person because
But you know what the funny thing is? You know, you
doesn't
get
work.
this. You know what characteristically you get when people start talking about stuff like that. It's like, oh, it's
Yeah.
foreign money coming in to buy all this. And you know
No.
what? No. Here's the thing. You're right, because
Yeah.
your reaction is perfect, because that's what people say. It's always easier to blame the other, right? And the
Yeah.
reality is there is some of that. We know that empirically. There's been books
Right.
written on that.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, it is still the domestic person buying who is accepting that and willing to make that leap. And the
Yeah.
reality is the vast majority of sales, say whatever you want. Like, I've even seen estimates that Vancouver got as bad as 1/3 over a certain period of time. Okay. That doesn't mean that the other 2/3 had to listen, that the other 2/3 had to participate, that the other 2/3 couldn't sit back and say, this is ridiculous, I'm not playing this game. Now, a certain percentage of them absolutely have to do something, right? That's just life. But the reality is we didn't have to play this game, but
Yeah.
everybody wanted a quick buck.
Yeah, it's I get it. I get it. I get it. I get it. It is hard to watch. I don't know if it's hard, but it's not easy to watch as other people are doing their home renos, adding
Yeah.
another floor to the house, buying other properties. It's hard to watch as people seem
Yeah.
to be getting ahead, and you're thinking,
I get it.
why
But
why shouldn't
but
I?
let's also talk about the place of luck in one's life. Okay. And this is
Yeah.
not just real estate. Okay. At the end of the day, I have zero time for anyone who won't acknowledge the luck that they've had in getting to where they are. Right now, you look at the book Outliers, which spells out, like, hey, like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, they were all born with the right time. Gates went to a school that had some of the earliest computer access. Like, he was born to an executive who sat on the IBM board. Like, all kinds of things that, like, stars aligned and created boom. And there you go, right? Warren Buffett will talk about this, all this other stuff. But the reality is that, look, you can't survive off luck, right? Like, luck and experience, luck and experience and the right skill set at the right time is what creates that incredible trajectory that can happen, right? But just because someone's more successful or has that house at the beginning doesn't mean that they were this basically brilliant person. I think it was Bill Gates who said um, the thing about success is that it can fool smart people into thinking they're smart at everything. And I would add to that in saying that the thing about success is it can fool people who aren't smart into thinking they are, right? And it's basically, you have to acknowledge the fact that, I've got friends who bought couple years out of university, right? And they look at the equity gains after over that period, which is now approaching 2 decades, right? And I bought much later in life, but I took a different path, right? I started my own business. I basically I couldn't buy because I was too busy investing in myself, right? And those trajectories went very different. Now, I'm happy to say in those cases I'm doing better. But what the reality is that there was also a huge role of luck in my life, not just the effort to get to where I am, because you can be the smartest, best person at anything. But at the end of the day, if you don't get the right opportunities, and that is luck, you have to help. You could try to work to create them. But if you don't have that semblance of luck, you will basically never have that benefit. So the reality is that, when I get the entire, again, going back to FOMO, it's hard to see everybody else doing this and moving on with their life. I've had this conversation. It's hard to feel like you're never going to get there if you don't do something soon. Absolutely. But
Yeah.
don't go thinking, like, the reality is that their timing just aligned. Those people that
Yeah.
you looked at, their timing just aligned. And I would also say, I don't judge people's wealth by their income statement. I judge it by their balance sheet, right? And this is what
Mm.
happens all the time. Okay. What happens all the time? Oh my God, this guy's loaded. Look how much money he's got. He's driving this car. Look at the money they splash around. Look at the vacations they go on. Look at all this. This is very common in certain fields where I will say to people, no, you cannot do all this because your financial plan says there's no way you're going to do it. I don't understand. All my colleagues are doing this, whatever. And I say to them, you don't know that they're not literally basically living off their line of credit, right? That they're not paying down that mortgage and taking it right back out of the line. Right. So
Yep.
the reality is that you see all this stuff happening. Now, the good thing is the balance sheets all look really good in the last couple of years because everything was going up. And that hit a lot of problems because people were able to continue to consume and increase their debt levels. But the reality is that game of musical chairs is over now. So, like, the reality is how solid is your balance sheet? That's how I'd measure wealth, not in consumption.
I, you ladies and gentlemen, please make sure you listen to what Jason just said, and I want to share a story to right off of that, Jason, because I remember seeing a file, and I've seen this many times, but I had another agent bring me this file where they were looking for I don't know 800,000 for this individual, and I looked it through and I said I declined it, and the person said, "Why are you declining it?" I said because they're going to be bankrupt in about a year, and she said to me, "You are crazy. They're worth $39 million. What in the world are you talking about?" And
What's the leakage look like?
I said, you know, I'm going to pass. Anyway, she called me 6 months later and said, "How did you know? How did you know?" And I said, "Well, when you start, there are just some things. They say wealth leaves clues, right? And so when you look at those numbers, someone who's made that kind of money should not have $250,000 credit cards with
Yep.
$253,000 owing on
Yeah.
those credit cards. You know, personal loans, 4 cars. I I've met people that are wealthy and they've got, you know, a collector Ferrari, a collector Porsche,
Yep.
you know, all these kind of things, but they don't have 4 cars that are all strictly liabilities, right? And this kind of stuff. And I was watching and I said, the moment this person they get held up on one deal, everything's going to back up. And sure enough, that's what happened.
Well, actually, I mean, if you ever, there's a really good article, I think it was in Toronto Life, about the entire King Street restaurant group, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like some of the highest end restaurants in the city, Jacob Steakhouse, right? What's the Buka? Like restaurants I love. Like I am a big foodie and I love eating at their places, right? And you know what? Those guys, that empire was built on just on basically robbing Peter to pay Paul and debt. And the second COVID hit, and borrowing from like very, let's call that secondary tertiary lenders. The second COVID hit, the entire house of cards collapsed, right? And
Yeah.
that is a metaphor for how some people, or an example of how some people live their lives. I quite literally, I kid you not, sat across from people who have earned north of $1 million for let's just say today, adjusted for inflation, north of $1 million for the better part of 30 to 40 years. Okay. Like they were that highly skilled, they earned that kind of money.
Right.
And I'm sitting there with these people like approaching 70. And I'm like, if you stopped working tomorrow, you'd basically be out of money in 6 months.
Wow.
Right. And meanwhile, at the same time, I've sat down with people where, I mean, back in the day, I used to say it's 50,000, let's call it 75. They've earned average wages their entire life, if that, right? And in addition to maybe they even are a member of a defined benefit pension that they need to, are millionaires, right? Will save up basically millions of dollars because they're just living within their means, right? Like
Yeah.
I hate rules of thumb. I absolutely abhor them, right? But I will say this much. If there's money not left over at the end of the month, right?
Yes.
And if you're not banking a minimum of 20 points, and what I mean by that is that better be at least split 50 at the very most. Half of that's going to principal payments. We'll say that, and the rest of it's going to actual investments. If you're not banking a minimum of that, you're not going to get to that threshold. You're not, right? And you know what? For people who are earning average wages, given where Canada Pension Plan is and what it pays and all the security, you're probably going to be okay if you can retire close to debt free, right? Like that's it. Like focus on that. You're probably going to be okay. But the higher your salary gets away from the average, the more it's on you to finance your retirement. And the reality is that no one else is planning that for you. And I always tell people, it's like I don't really care where it goes. You could have the silliest freaking hobby I've ever heard in my life. You can collect spoons from your travels. I don't care, right? You could pay 10,000 for those spoons. I don't care as long as it's sustainable. And that's the issue.
Mm. Well, I think you're more hopeful than I am, Jason, because I've seen a lot of people's finances, and I can tell you that the numbers you just threw out is not the norm. A lot
No,
of
it's not.
people would. There's a lot of people that couldn't make it out of 30 days. Couldn't make 30 days
Yeah.
and be able to afford to pay for their mortgage, their
Oh,
cars,
I've seen
their
it.
all that kind of stuff,
I've seen
right?
it. I've done pro bono work in the past. I've seen it on both ends,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I will say that it's not the crazy thing that this really gets to people is that it really isn't about the income level, right? If you have income at a sustainable level that's,
Yeah.
hopefully beyond minimum wage, it really is about consumption. Now, I will say
Yeah.
that in cities like Toronto, consumption is a much harder problem, right?
Yeah.
But because again, even base stuff is going to cost you a fortune.
Yeah.
But the number of times I've had people like say to me, like, I'm never gonna be able to stop working. I'm gonna die poor. End of story, right? And it's like, okay, well, let's look at your situation. Okay, your mortgage is pretty much done, but yeah, you have no savings. But you know what? You and your spouse have Canada Pension Plan and all these security. You defer that to 70, and that is basically a guaranteed income from the government, which is combined over, if you assuming you qualify for both of it, for both of them, over $60,000 a year. That takes
Hmm.
care of a lot of needs, right? Most people don't even stop to think about, like, most people will do one of two things. Either they forget that these things exist or assume they're not going to get them, which is misguided in most cases. And when we actually, even people with some savings who've got good income, when we factor it in, most people are actually in better shape than they think they are, at least for retirement, right? Prior to, you gotta sort yourself out. And I would say that when it comes to now, unfortunately, most people do not wait until 70 because they're not well educated enough to do this. But there's very big deferral benefits to waiting to 70, and that even if you take it early and bank that money, you're not going to make up those deferral benefits. It's a guaranteed win, unless you're going to be imminent death. So the reality is a lot of people are in better shape than they thought they are, but there are absolutely the people at both ends of the spectrum, right? And again, it's not necessarily an income issue. There are people
Yeah.
like, again, there are people I've met who made more money in 1 year than the average person makes in their lifetime,
Yeah.
and they're still close to broke.
Yeah. I I actually agree with you there very much so because I've had the conversation with people about where they choose to live even, in terms of the cost of housing. And if you choose to, you could move, let's say, a little further out, and then you could get something that will not take as much off of the top, and you'll be able to live within your means. But then, of course, well, if I move out there and
Yeah.
all of this kind of
Well,
stuff.
yeah, I know. I mean, it's not, it's the difference, a philosophical difference
Because of course, I live outside
between
of Toronto, right?
fair.
So
But here's the difference. It's the difference between the concept of can't and won't, right? A lot of people,
right.
the people will use the term can't for anything. Oh,
Yes.
I can't say no to that. I can't do this. I can't. Let's be frank. The only things you can't do are breathe, eat, and drink water. So I can't not do. You have to do those three things.
Yeah.
Everything else is technically optional. Everything else, right? And it's the things that we put in our mind about what we're willing to give up or not give up that basically prevent that. So the reality is, and I've seen this happen too with clients. It's like, you know what? They had a big Toronto home. They wanted to keep it in retirement. They struggled for it. And then they finally just, went to go visit a friend who made a move in, let's say, St. Catharines, right? Like, actual case. And they're like, you know what? It's nice here. It's quiet. Oh my God, I could get a house for this compared to what I have it in the city. I'm close to a couple friends. And next thing you know, they sold their house in Toronto with the St. Catharines. They banked a huge difference. And their quality of life is increased because you know what, here's the thing. It's been proven by many, many scientific experiments. Financial stress inhibits your ability to think, right?
Mm.
Financial stress, basically, you actually, believe it or not, quote unquote, act dumber when under financial stress. Your
Absolutely.
IQ, as measured when under financial stress, will actually be lower than your baseline, right? So the reality is,
Yeah.
is that the time that, unfortunately, the human mind is wired in such a way need to be able to think more clearer, we regress into a more flight or flight response, a very primitive response, and that actually inhibits our ability to think. Right. It
Yes.
also, unfortunately, inhibits people's ability to learn when they're growing up, which is unfortunate, which is a societal issue. But the reality is that the freedom garnered by looking at the same pot of resources that this person has, an example, same
Mhm.
pot of resources, nothing changed, right? Except for the expense of moving, which was an expense,
Yes.
and that shift in relocation, basically, by the reallocation of resources, alleviated an enormous amount of mental stress and led to quality of life increases that they didn't think were
Mm.
possible. And
Yeah.
this phenomenon is very, very common, I will tell you, with old people not wanting to go to homes. Okay, now I know we had this entire disaster in COVID, right? I get that, and there was many homes that were terrible. But I will be very thankful. My grandfather spent the last couple of years of his life in a retirement home just down the street from my house, where he was treated incredibly well, and they were safe and they were protected, and didn't have they had like very few cases. So it was a really really great place for him to be. But I've seen this countless times with clients, parents, and even my own family. They don't want to go. They don't want to go. They don't want to go. They want to stay in their house. It's important to them. They don't want to go. Then they go, and now they're surrounded by people of their own age with similar life experiences, with similar interests. And suddenly it's like they got a couple of years younger. They're reinvigorated. They're reinvigorated. The value of community, the elimination of stress, not just financial stress, but the elimination of basically the stress of having to take care of themselves fully, right? Like that is like unbelievably better. I will absolutely state that in my experience, it probably adds years to their lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other part of that one that's interesting is the social aspect. Oftentimes, I think we don't realize how much we are, beings that need community, and people will often go from being alone in a home to all of a sudden they've got so many people around them, and
Yeah.
I've heard that some of these homes can get quite lively from staff. I won't get into that
Oh yeah.
side of.
I'm not gonna get into that either. But I mean, like I will tell you. I mean, even I've often encouraged clients like with parents who basically were resistant to it and say, listen, mom, dad, whatever it is, they have an overnight stay, right? They have an
Yeah,
over the weekend stay. Go try it out. That's all I'm asking. Go try it out. If you don't like
yeah.
it, I'll never say boo about it again. The next thing you
Okay,
know, the weekend's over and they want to come right. They want to move there full time.
let me jump you into a couple of touchy subjects
Oh,
for
here
us
we go.
here in Canada, and they're touchy subjects, and you can feel free to go whichever direction you want. I think the financial ones are the important. Carbon tax. While we're
Look,
already dealing
ha-
with inflation.
look. Here's the thing. I am notorious for being called conservative by liberal by people on the left wing and being a left wing pinko commie by people on the right wing. Right. I basically what I am a fan. I'm a firm centrist and I'm a fan of solid policy. So
Yep.
let's talk about this from multiple angles.
Yep.
Says conversation of the day. There's the structure of it. The structure of the tax is actually quite sound. Why? Because it is meant to divert is basically meant to disincentivize the consumption of carbon. Raising the price of carbon heavy options basically incentivizes you to go to less carbon heavy options. Basic economics. It's a sin tax. Okay, makes sense, right? So you have this trade-off now. Now people might not like change, but this is, and we'll get to that in a second. But this is the trade-off. The second piece of this is the credit you receive on your taxes, which basically which is, and I got to look at the numbers again, is set at a level where basically the average person and whatever the average family who's heating their home, driving to work, all that stuff, like around normal consumption, whatever they determine to be normal consumption is, and that's up for debate also, ends up neutral. Okay, I pay throughout the year. My taxes end up neutralizing this entire thing if you are at the right level. If you are a net under contributor to carbon emissions, you end up better off. If you are a net over contributor to carbon emissions, you are worse off. This is actually quite sound structure, quite honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we might not like the cost of the pump, but the actual structure of it, well done, hats off, right? That's how you should structure these things.
Okay.
Now, the entire argument of well, other countries aren't doing stuff, so we're not going to get there on climate change. First of all, you don't fix. Here's what doesn't fix climate change: doing nothing.
Right.
And the reality is, telling others to do what we haven't done jack isn't an option either, right? So frankly, we need to do stuff. Now, what I don't believe is that all countries should be given the same type of carbon allowances under an agreement. And the reason because of that is because we are a global marketplace and there are different resources extracted in the global marketplace, and different resources basically produce different amounts of carbon, right? So the reality is that people hate to hear this. We are always going to need oil. Why? Plastics alone, everything else it does, right? So we are still going to always have a market for that. And that is always going to be more carbon intensive than other things. So the reality is, and this is probably politically impossible to do, but literally the global market demand for there has to be there should be some understanding for the fact that some countries should be able to be permitted, or some activities should be permitted greater carbon consumption than others, because it meets the needs of the entire world, not to simply say, oh, here's the year we all admitted X, drop it by Y. Okay, yes, we should drop it by Y globally, but the allocation, there are some countries where it's a heck of a lot easier to get on that threshold than others because of their, not just, again, the economy is a corollary to the actual resource extraction and production of carbon. But, the reality is there, like I said, there's company like, I don't know for sure about this, but I'm going to guess that Switzerland probably had an easier time hitting their target than Canada would, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know of any real carbon intensive jobs in Switzerland or industries in Switzerland. So is it fair that we give them the same benchmark? I don't think that makes sense.
Yeah. My real question, Jason, my real concern about it is a lot of it has to do with timing, and then what we're blaming on it. When we look at the finances, when we're talking about interest rates going up, and we're watching the impact, obviously, on people's mortgages, and we're talking about that's taking money out of their pocket. We're watching of course, the carbon tax. It's taking money out of the pocket. They're not driving as much. It'd be something different if it was just on driving. But when you start getting into heating your home and heating fuel, all of this kind of stuff, I start being concerned and looking at how the metric of the inflation rate gets calculated.
So let's go back to that, right?
Yeah.
Again, they're feeling it now. What are they going to feel at tax time?
What are they going to feel at tax time?
Yeah. Someone's consuming this is the entire incentive system. Yes, it hurts at the point of consumption. If you're not a worsely skewed actor, you should end up if you're basically around the threshold, you should be basically net neutral. Yeah. So that's the reality of it. It's not a pure, people look at the actual tax on the thing, right? And forget about that there's a second mechanism in the background.
Okay.
So that's the reality of it. Now, yes, as for timing, right? And I've seen this, and you know what? Let's separate political rhetoric from reality, okay? Because it doesn't matter who's in charge. The other side's always going to say they're doing it wrong. Like, that's the universal law. Right. That's the universal law. And the other side is also going to make claims that you should do X when they full well know that you cannot, right? So one of the things that was talked about was, CPP contributions are increasing this year for employees. This is the absolute worst timing. You need to go back and change that. Well, changes the CPP require ratification of provincial input and provincial sign off and all of this. So the amount of time and effort and energy it would take to actually get these changes done, it's not like flipping a switch, right? Some of these taxes, it's not, people seem to think the government can basically change policy on a dime. Okay. We can pass a law. There's a process. The honest truth is so here's the other thing too, by the time some of this stuff is digested, and basically, let's say we did start to change. So what I don't want people believing is that they vote on the other party. The other party gets rid of the carbon tax, and tomorrow it all goes back to where it was before. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
Yeah,
because it takes time. But what's happened? But here's the goal. Let's go back to basic economics. What's happened in the meantime? What's happened in the meantime is people have been making lifestyle decisions and changes in consumption patterns that basically go somewhere else. Now, does dropping this mean that they go back? Not necessarily.
No.
Right. No. So it's like, look, there are welcome to life. There are no good answers to any problem. There's just trade-offs.
Right. There's something for me when it comes to looking at a number of these policies, and definitely about timing, but some of them, like for instance, I'm going to get into touch.
Let me peg you here for a second on timing. Okay?
Yeah.
We go in, we pass policy today that is going to be enacted in a couple years. How the heck do we know what the world of a couple of years looks like? And then we say, this is the wrong time. Okay, come on. The train departed the station and is at full speed now, and you're suggesting that the train could stop on a dime. Again, that is a challenge, right? So I don't want to, here's the thing. There's an old saying is that, amateurs discuss strategy, pros discuss logistics, right? Because at the end of the day, you can have the best idea in the universe. If they can't make it happen, it's worthless, right? Yeah. And the reality is that every strategy that's implemented and changed does require time, momentum, effort, all kinds of support systems to get there. And once it starts going, a reversal of course is like changing the direction of a battleship. It will take time.
Yes. Yes. Having worked for the federal government before, I can tell you that I've
Yeah.
watched that, and I agree with you very
And
much
let's
so.
and let's also
Yeah.
remember, this is the other thing too. And I had an argument, like, so I got contacted by someone who said I should be lobbying on behalf of elimination of RIF minimum payments out of RIFs, right? And I said, listen, I'm of a split mind on this, right? First off, the set RIF minimum payment is not specific. This is a set level that helps a percentage of the pop. It's right for the percentage of the population, but not right for everybody, because again, not everybody's the same, right? I said, listen, while I'm in favor of more flexibility in this, my concern is that this is going to lead to greater taxation long run, because people will just defer, take the minimum. The RSPs will be bigger when they die, and then they're going to be taxed at a bigger rate in total, because their income is larger on death than they ever would have. And they would have been better off taking it slowly along the way, right? This person emailed back in reply saying, I can't believe you're taking this stance. All I want is the freedom to choose and all this other stuff. I said, listen, I'm always concerned about what changes the policy breaks somewhere else, right? There's a negative implication, no matter what you think, no matter what policy, no matter how benevolent, there's always going to be something that you didn't think of that basically ends up screwing it up for another group of people, right? That RIF issue is a perfect example. I'll give you another example we all just lived through. License plate sticker renewals, right?
Yes.
Let's get rid of that system. Here's a refund for the money that pro rata till your next renewal. Sounds great. How many people now don't realize that they still need to renew their sticker, renew their license plate, right?
That's a great thing. Are you telling me that we actually need to do that again?
Yes, you do. You still have to renew your license plate. So your license plate, even though there's no sticker, there you go. You didn't know. The majority of people still don't know this. You still need to renew it. Cops can still pull you over because your plate is out of date and still ticket you, right? People do not know this. So there's a perfect example. That sticker, as much as it was an annoyance to all of us, and it was basically a cost, and we still need to pay to renew, just not the same. I don't know what it is to renew, but you got to do it online. You can get email reminders and set yourself up for it. But people do not realize you still have to renew your license. And so again, policy got fixed and broke something else.
Yes. Let's just get into something that I think is massively disruptive. We got to talk about this, and I know you've got thoughts on this. Chat GPT.
Oh, jeez. I knew you were going there.
Artificial intelligence. I've been playing with this stuff, and I'm watching, to some degree, I feel like it's time bomb. Not that we didn't know it was going to be here, but I'm really amazed at what this stuff is able to do right now.
Oh, if you think GPT is bad, wait until the GPT. So that's based off GPT-3, which has basically was it 175 billion parameters. The next one, GPT-4, will have 100 trillion parameters. Here's the thing about ChatGPT. Does it ever sound like it's not sure?
Absolutely. Like I mean, in terms of, sometimes it just gives you the completely wrong answer, but I've actually had it where it is in the
confidence upper quadrant. Okay. It is in the confidence upper quadrant. And I have had people send me stuff on how do I compose a portfolio. I'm like, well, this is fundamentally incorrect because here's all the research that proves it wrong. So the reality is it's giving you, it's like asking an opinion, but maybe the answers on average are going to be better. Right.
Yes.
But doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's the first piece. The second piece is that I find so right now, at least currently, synthesis is an issue, right? Taking this concept, asking a question about a concept and a human being's reaction to it. Good luck, right? Because again, we are not machines. We are gray matter. We are organic. And what seems, there's a saying in the Austrian school that basically, when you understand the background, there's no such thing as a rationality of people's viewpoints, right? Because there's an entire experience that informs that viewpoint. However, to a robot, it seems irrational, right? Because it can think more linearly. So you have an issue there with synthesis, right? So that's not an issue. And I will say that you get a level of depth of answer if you ask for it that seems pretty good. But it lacks a level of true deep understanding, because it's not conscious, of the project, right? So here's what I will say. We are going to see a supernova level of increase in near useless content. Just very generalistic stuff. We're going to see that. And anyone who was, I think BuzzFeed just got rid of a bunch of people is going to use ChatGPT for things like listicles and stuff like that because it is a low threshold thinking, right? So yeah. Now that said, I actually think it increases the value of deep dive, truly understood of expertise, because
Yes.
the more prolific, not the more prolific the base level becomes, the more rare in comparison the expertise looks, right? And this is the issue. So that, I think anyone who wants to commit themselves to long form, deep dive, true research, understanding of things is going to do just fine, because if anything, people get tired of the bubblegum level, basic entry level nonsense, right? But I also will say where I will utilize this, and big up to Notion for installing this before ChatGPT was a thing, is that it is a great way to get started on articles, right? So Notion is a knowledge management platform. It's a crazy way for running your business. But point is that I, for example, am going to be writing content for members of an association I work for, right? So I was like, let's test this out. What are the primary ways of registering a business in this country, and the pros and cons? And it basically said, like, there are multiple ways. There's sole proprietorship, there's partnership, there's corporation. Gave me a couple of pros and cons. I'm like, okay, you know what? This is like, equal to a high schooler's level of research written out, but it's well structured. I can start with this and expand on. So it will
Yes.
also enable people who are experts to basically just not start from a blank page, but
Yes.
start from something that is a little bit more. So I think if anything, it will allow and enable people like me to pump out more valuable information,
Yes.
not having had to write the introductory stuff and the low hanging fruit. Now the
Yes.
question becomes: does that create a disjointed experience in terms of the voice in which it's speaking?
Jason, I think that you're absolutely right. I was actually talking with my kids on this one, and I'm asking them, hey, are you using this? Have you tried this out? And we started talking about how to take it, use it as a tool to create a summary
Yeah.
of the book you're reading, and then take it and start writing from there. Exactly what you're
Oh yeah.
talking about.
Well, that's
Get
the other
it to
thing is
give you
someone's
some
good.
bones.
Wait until someone's got to invent the artificial intelligence now to basically check and see if ChatGPT was used when people submit homework, because that's a thing. Now here's
Yeah.
the thing. But let's talk about how this evolves, right? Because this
Yes.
is a similar trend and evolution, because this is today, right? In the future, it will
Yes.
get better. So here's
Yes.
what I say, like using my industry as an analogy, right? It used to be very burdensome to open an account and get access to investments. Now it's easy, right? Advisors moved up the complexity scale to start offering more services. So then it basically started to be like, okay, we can develop diversified portfolios for you. That involves a bunch of research and a bunch of work and math. Okay, we can do that. Now it's easy, right? Commoditized, both of those. Then we started getting into financial planning, because basically that's continuing to move up the complexity and value spectrum, right? Because when the easy things become when the intro level things become low burden, you can start delivering greater and greater value further up the channel, right? Because now you have more and more time. So, but that said, I'm working with a company that has brought artificial intelligence to financial planning software, and what was previously benchmarked at 10 hours is
Yes.
now, knock on wood, let's call it 2 to 3, including client engagement. So you're looking at potentially a 60% plus reduction in hours spent. So what happens, right? Now, people who look at the industry from the outside in say, oh, great, advisors can handle more clients, therefore there'll be less advisors. And I'm like, this is not an engineering problem. This is a human problem. No one wants to call up their advisor and the advisors say, let me look up your file to see who it is you are again, because I can't remember, because I service 300 people, right? They don't want that experience. They want the person who says, hey Dave, how you doing? Yeah, good. Did your kids have leg heal? Like, I know they broke it last one. They want that experience, right? But that also opens the door for, again, you look at talk to anyone in the US, this is the way we're going. The future of my job will be things that robots are not good at. It will not be number crunching and all this other stuff. It is the behavioral coaching. It is how do I take this plan that I basically did within a couple of hours or an hour with this artificial intelligence that does a better job than I would have done as a solo individual, and how do I translate what it's telling us to do into basically something you can understand? I can answer questions around the recommendations, but more importantly, I can work with you to implement the entire thing and get past the behavioral and other issues you have that prevents you from implementing that, and be there to counsel you on how all the negative stuff that happens in your life you can get past.
Yeah.
So the reality is the future of my job is one that is far more based in almost psychology and coaching than it is just in pure mathematics, right? At least for the majority of people. So that is what's happening. And I think, anyone whose career was writing very fluffy things for clickbait, ooh, I don't like where you live right now. Like, you're in a bad spot. But I do think it's, again, in the world that's inundated by this, right? Really, really powerful journalism is just so much more valuable in that regard. Now, monetization is a difficulty, but it is, I think, some of the better writers out there are out there writing their own blogs or newsletters that are getting a ton of traction because they're valuable. I pay for newsletters to these authors, because some of these authors, because their insights are that good.
Yeah. I think this is going to be very disruptive in the fintech space, because for those people that like to call themselves experts and they don't add on the nuance that you've just talked about in terms of really knowing your client, and you're just happy sitting in your chair being the expert because you know this information like the old school librarian.
I opened an account and sold you a mutual fund that I've talked to, that the wholesaler told me to sell. Like, let's refer to that as the lowest hanging fruit of them all. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, model needs to die, like, full stop. And it's not providing anyone real value.
All right. We've hit time. Let me ask you one final question here, Jason. What do you have lined up for 2023 that you're excited about?
Oh, actually, it's been a little bit of a slow start. I've only got, I'm working on a couple of speaking gigs that might land in the next couple of while. I can't make them public. They'll be made public on Twitter when that happens. There's all kinds of great stuff happening in my business in terms of digitization, in terms of getting new people up to speed. So I'm excited about that. There is a bunch of stuff I'm working on with some fintechs with advising. There's gonna be some big announcements there. I've got a great lineup of people so far for all my podcasts. Honestly, everything's heading in the right direction. No one big thing. I'm happy to just kind of keep this train rolling down the track and see where it leads.
Moving life in a good direction.
That's
with Jason Pereira. Jason, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your thoughts on all of these. And where's the best place for people to get a hold of you? On your website?
Yeah, jasonpereira.ca. So Pereira. I'm sure you'll put in the show notes, but that's my content site. That's where my podcast, my occasional blog posts go. Everything else I do just gets funneled through that. And yes, if you and then there's Twitter, in case you want to support or fight me on anything, that's where I live.
Be wary, guys. I'm trying to fight with Jason, but Jason, thank you so much for coming on the show again. We love having you on. Love getting your insights, and I even love getting slapped around a couple of bits there, because you kind of reminded me on a couple of things that about the machine that I had lost touch on. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much for being on the show.
It's simple. Everything is simpler on the outside. Everything. Yeah. Just remember that.
Love it. All right, guys. We'll see you again next week. Take care.
Take care.